Welcome back to our deep dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental, how to find genuine, lasting peace, that sense of satisfaction, even when things are tough.
hmm
We've got some fantastic excerpts you shared from Jeremiah Burroughs' classic, The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. And honestly, the wisdom in here feels incredibly timely.
It really does. You have to remember, Burroughs wasn't writing from an easy chair. He lived through some seriously turbulent times himself.
Right. Which makes his take on cultivating contentment really potent for us today, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's grounded in reality.
So our mission today is to really get under the skin of what Burroughs meant by Christian contentment, not just a definition, but how it actually works, how you live it out.
Yeah, moving beyond just like a surface understanding.
Exactly. We're not talking about just feeling okay sometimes. This is deeper. So let's jump right in. Burroughs kicks things off by defining contentment in a way that, well, might surprise some people.
Yeah, what's striking right away is how much he insists it's an inside job. It's not about just gritting your teeth or, putting on a brave face.
Right.
He says, contentment is a sweet inward heart thing. It is a work of the spirit indoors. It all starts with the heart submitting quietly to God's will.
That's such a crucial starting point. It's not performance, it's posture. The heart's posture. He even references Psalm 62, right?
Hmm.
That idea of the soul waiting only on God.
Precisely. And that translation only is key. It suggests a complete reliance, not just sort of passively waiting around.
But he's also clear that praying for deliverance, asking God for help, that's not opposed to being content.
No, not at all. As long as that asking comes with submission,
Yeah.
asking God to deliver, but trusting his timing, his how, his when, it's aligning your request with his sovereignty.
Not just demanding your own way, basically.
Exactly.
He also contrasts this inner focus with getting, well, distracted by less important things. That Nehemiah quote is powerful.
Oh, yeah, Nehemiah 6.3. I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease whilst I leave it and come down to you?
It speaks volumes about having your priorities straight, doesn't it? Your heart set on what truly matters.
It really does. The contented heart, for Burroughs, values its connection with God so much that it just won't be easily pulled away by trivial stuff or, as he puts it, those heart-consuming cares.
And it resists sinking discouragements, too.
And
Doesn't need constant external validation.
right, it's not propped up by circumstances, and it's not just a fleeting good mood either.
No.
No, he stresses it's the constant tenor and temper of their hearts. It's a stable underlying state, a disposition.
An inward, consistent peace. Okay, so he then calls this a gracious frame of the heart. What does adding gracious tell us?
Well, gracious here points to its source. This isn't just like a naturally calm personality type.
Or sheer willpower, like the Stoics, maybe. He mentioned Socrates.
Exactly. This isn't achieved by human effort alone. Gracious contentment flows from God's grace, his undeserved favor working in us. And interestingly, he says this grace actually makes the heart very quick and lively in the service of God.
Oh, that's interesting. So contentment isn't passive.
Mm-hmm.
It actually fuels action.
Right. It energizes you for serving God. And he clarifies this is a free act. He uses an analogy. Think of someone born in prison.
Okay.
They might seem content, but only because they don't know anything different. It's not a conscious choice made with full knowledge.
So real contentment isn't just ignorance of something better.
Precisely. For the person who is aware of hardship, who knows things could be easier, choosing contentment through what Burroughs calls a sanctified judgment. That's the free act he's talking about.
It's an informed choice.
Yes. And it's not just being numb either. He uses another analogy. Someone paralyzed doesn't feel a pinch, but that's not contentment. That's just lack of feeling. Gracious contentment feels the difficulty, but still chooses peace.
And it goes deeper than just acknowledging God is fair in the situation.
Much deeper. It moves past simply saying, okay, God is righteous here, to affirming, like Eli did in 1 Samuel 3.18, good is the hand of Lotto, even when it hurts.
Wow.
Burroughs even pushes us beyond David's reflection in Psalm 119, it is good for me that I was afflicted, to actually seeing God's hand in the affliction as ultimately good.
Which brings us to what he calls the mystery of contentment. Sounds paradoxical.
It totally is. He lays out this idea. It may be said of one who is contented in a Christian way that he is the most contented man in the world and yet the most unsatisfied.
Okay, how does that work? Content and unsatisfied.
The key is where the satisfaction or lack thereof lies. A truly gracious heart, Burroughs argues, will never find its ultimate portion, its deep satisfaction in earthly things. No amount of stuff will ever be enough.
Because their real treasure, their portion, is God himself.
Exactly. Unlike the worldly heart that's always trying to fill the void with more possessions, more status, whatever.
So it's about aligning our deepest desires with God, not trying to make worldly things satisfy those desires, bringing desires down to what we have in God, rather than trying to heap up possessions to meet endless desires.
Perfectly put. And then he throws in another really profound concept, finding relief from affliction by taking on the burden of sin.
Wait, how does that work? Taking on more burden helps.
It sounds backwards, right?
Okay.
But he suggests that the heavier the burden of your sin is to your heart, the lighter will the burden of your affliction be to your heart.
So, seriously, grappling with our own sinfulness actually makes external troubles feel lighter.
That's the idea. By truly humbling ourselves before God about our sin, the sting of the current trial loses some of its power in comparison. He even applies it to marriage. Instead of spouses blaming each other during hardship, they should first humble themselves before God for their own failings.
That's a radical shift from blame to repentance. Okay, let's talk about the power of grace in affliction. How does grace help us in the struggle?
Burroughs says grace does something amazing. It enables Christians to turn afflictions into mercies, can turn darkness into light. He compares it to Christ turning water into wine.
The same raw material, but a transformed outcome.
Exactly. Two people can face the exact same difficulty, but because of grace working in one, their internal experience is vastly different. The key isn't removing the problem, but accessing God's power within the problem.
And part of that is focusing on what we can do now.
Yes. Focusing on present duty in our current reality, not dwelling on what used to be. He mentions Acts 13.36 about David serving God's purpose in his own generation. We serve God where we are now.
Which involves aligning our will with God's will, both his providential will, what he allows, and his commands.
Absolutely. Burroughs uses this image of our will being melted into the will of God. When that happens, there's this deep peace. And crucially, he says contentment doesn't come from adding more comforts externally, but from purging out inward lusts and bitter humors like James chapter 4 talks about. It's that internal cleanup again.
Always back to the heart. Now he talks about the saint's right to comfort. What's the distinction he's making there?
He draws a line between how, let's say, the wicked experience good things versus how believers do. For the wicked, it's just a donation, God's general kindness. But for the saint, it's a right of purchase through Christ.
All right. How so?
Because Christ paid for it. It's part of the inheritance believers have in him. So the comforts we enjoy aren't just random blessings, they're secured for us.
That gives them a different weight.
It does. And he uses this beautiful phrase, earthly comforts for believers are like earnest pennies for all the glory that is reserved for them.
Like a down payment, a taste of what's to come.
Exactly. A little foretaste of the incredible internal inheritance waiting for us.
That really changes how you view even small blessings. Okay, so how does focusing on Christ specifically help achieve contentment?
Burroughs points out that looking at Christ's own suffering, how he endured injustice, how he was spoken against, can give us immense perspective and strength in our own trial.
Like if Christ went through that.
Right. If he submitted patiently when people lied about him or treated him terribly, maybe we can find grace to do the same. Peter talks about this, how Jesus didn't retaliate but entrusted himself to God.
It reframes our own suffering.
Absolutely. And faith is the connection. Faith draws strength from Christ when we're afflicted. Burroughs makes this incredible point. Even if your burden feels doubled, the strength you get through faith in Christ can be trebled.
Wow. So the strength outweighs the burden.
Yes. He asks powerfully, though you cannot tell how to bear it with your own strength, yet how can you tell what you will do with the strength of Jesus Christ? It echoes Paul in 2 Corinthians, right? My grace is sufficient for you.
For my power is made perfect in weakness.
That's incredibly hopeful when you feel like you just can't handle something.
It really is.
Now, what about this idea of enjoying God as all in all? Sounds like heaven.
Well, he does contrast it with heaven, where saints won't need sun or moon or temples because God himself will be their everything, their light, their satisfaction. That's Revelation 21.
Right. But Burroughs argues we can and should experience much more of God being our all in all right now on earth.
Finding our primary satisfaction in him, even amidst earthly needs and wants.
Exactly. He brings up Jacob and Esau. Esau surveys his wealth and says, I have enough. But Jacob, who actually had less materially but had God's covenant blessing, says, I have all. That Hebrew word implies overflowing abundance because he had God.
That's a profound difference, which leads nicely into finding contentment from God's covenant and promises.
Yes, a gracious heart finds deep stability and peace in the fact that God has bound himself to his people through his covenant promises. This is totally different from the world scrambling for satisfaction and things that always let you down eventually.
So in hard times, we can lean on those promises.
Absolutely, we can plead them back to God. Burroughs mentions Psalm 91 promises of protection.
But, okay, the obvious question. Sometimes godly people do face terrible things. Those promises of protection or prosperity don't always seem to pan out literally.
That's a fair and important point. Burroughs addresses it. He suggests that while Old Testament promises under the law sometimes had more direct outward fulfillments, the promises under the gospel often work differently.
How so?
He uses an analogy. A loving father might take a toy back from a child for a good reason, promising to give them something even better later, maybe something more suited to their maturity. God always keeps his promises, but sometimes he fulfills them in deeper spiritual ways that outweigh the outward thing we were expecting.
So maybe not removal of the trial, but his presence in the trial, or
Yeah.
spiritual strength, or bringing good out of it somehow.
Exactly. He points to verses like Isaiah 43:2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, or 2 Corinthians 4, we are hard pressed, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair. The promise isn't necessarily avoiding the fire, but God's presence with us in it.
Trusting his faithfulness, even when the circumstances look bleak. Okay, Burroughs then outlines specific lessons from Christ's School of Contentment. It sounds like this is something you learn.
Definitely. He sees contentment not as automatic, but as a skill, a discipline learned from Christ himself. And the first lesson, it's a tough one, self-denial.
Ah, yes. He quotes John Bradford, the martyr.
Seeing criminals led to execution and saying, there but for the grace of God goes John Bradford. That's radical humility, recognizing what we deserve apart from grace.
What does this self-denial look like practically?
Burroughs breaks it down into 7 aspects,
Yeah.
basically. Knowing we deserve nothing but hell, that we are nothing in ourselves, can do nothing good on our own, have nothing truly ours, are actually worse than nothing because of sin, that our loss is no loss to God's greatness, and therefore,
Therefore,
we should be utterly amazed at any mercy we receive rather than complaining about what we lack. This kind of self-view helps us justify God in everything and just wonder at his kindness. He contrasts Saul content when little in his own eyes, but discontent once pride took over.
so humility is the bedrock. What's the next lesson?
Understanding the vanity of the creature, seeing the emptiness, the temporary nature of all worldly things, not just intellectually, but really grasping it deep down through the lens of the gospel in Christ's school.
So we stop expecting worldly things to give us ultimate satisfaction. Like Ecclesiastes says, vanity of vanities.
Exactly. When you truly see their vanity, you stop chasing them as your ultimate goal.
And the third lesson.
Prioritizing the one necessary thing, our relationship with God. He uses the Mary and Martha story from Luke 10. If that main thing, our connection with God, is solid, then the smaller worries and stresses of life shouldn't throw us off balance so much.
Keeping perspective. If the big thing is right, the little things shrink. Makes sense. Okay, how does understanding providence in God's course help?
It's about deeply accepting that everything, the good, the bad, the uncomfortable, what he calls traveler's fare on life's journey, everything is under God's sovereign, wise control.
Not just the big stuff, but the details too.
All of it. And distinguishing between the thing itself, like wealth, and its goodness in relation to God. Wealth isn't bad, but its true good is found when it's used for God, when it's seen as his provision.
And knowing ourselves is key here too.
Yes, he uses an analogy of a nurse understanding why a baby is crying. We need to understand our own hearts, what triggers our discontent, what's really going on underneath.
So we can address the root cause.
Right. And he adds this interesting point. Sometimes understanding the burden of a prosperous condition can actually make you more content with less.
How so? What burdens?
The burden of care and distraction, the constant worry. The burden of temptation, he mentions Beelzebub, the god of flies, being attracted to the honey of prosperity. And the burden of accountability, having more, means more responsibility before God.
That's a perspective shift. Seeing potential downsides to what the world chases. What about evils to avoid? What hinders contentment?
A huge one he warns against is being given up to your own desires. He says that kind of spiritual judgment where God just lets you have what your sinful heart wants is far worse than any outward suffering.
So having our desires crossed can actually be a mercy.
A profound mercy, yes. It stops us from potentially destroying ourselves. And again, he hammers home the point. God's providence is universal. Nothing, not one detail happens apart from his hand. Accepting that is crucial.
Which ties into his final points about why God's people often face affliction.
Exactly. He says quite directly, it's God's ordinary way in this world. He quotes 1 Peter 4:12n, "Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal as though something strange were happening." This is normal for believers in a fallen world.
It's not a sign God has abandoned us.
No, he uses Luther's phrases. God humbles to exalt, kills to make alive, confounds to glorify. It's his paradoxical way of working. Even, as Burroughs says, having but a hard breakfast, we should be content if we see it from God's hand, serving his purpose.
Seeing even minor hardships as part of that bigger refining plan. Wow.
It demands a huge shift in perspective.
This whole deep dive into Burroughs has been incredibly illuminating. It's so clear that this contentment he describes isn't superficial at all. It's a deep, grace-fueled work of the heart.
Absolutely. It really pushes you towards some serious self-examination, doesn't it? Looking honestly at your desires, your reactions, and ultimately finding that lasting satisfaction only in God himself, the one who truly is all in all.
It really does. So here's something to mull over. Considering Burroughs' powerful words, especially that idea about finding contentment even in a hard breakfast when you see God's hand in it, what might shift in how you view the smaller everyday frustrations or challenges you face right now?
That's a great question to take away.
It really is. We definitely encourage you to explore the rare jewel of Christian contentment. Further for yourself, see how these ideas connect with your own life. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.